They said the gods of Egypt demanded purity. But what they really demanded was obedience. Behind the glowing temples, behind the gold and incense, there were screams that never made it into the hieroglyphs. Because the priests, the men who claimed to speak for the gods, were hiding something the world was never meant to know. They took young girls, called them temple virgins, and told everyone they were chosen by the divine. But once those girls stepped inside the temple walls, they never truly came back out. What happened inside those chambers was not holy. It was haunting, and the truth, buried for thousands of years, is darker than any curse of the pharaohs. So if you thought Egypt's darkest secrets were written on tomb walls, think again. The real horror was living, breathing, and wearing the mask of faith. Stay till the end, because what Egyptian priests did to these temple virgins was worse than death itself. Like and subscribe to Dark Pages of History, where truth is darker than myth. And today, we lift the veil on Egypt's most forbidden secret. Ancient Egypt, a land of eternal sunlight where the Nile brought life and the gods ruled every heartbeat. To live there was to believe. Every river flood, every sunrise, every sickness, all came from divine will. The temples rose like mountains of stone, glittering with gold and perfume. To common people, they were gateways to heaven. But to those who lived within them, they were cages of silence. The priests held absolute power. They decided when to plant crops, how to cure diseases, even when a pharaoh was worthy to rule. In a world that feared angering the gods, questioning a priest was unthinkable. To serve in the temple was the highest honor imaginable, especially for a young girl. Families dreamed that their daughters might be chosen as servants of the divine. They believed it meant safety, purity, and prestige. But the temple didn't choose out of love, it chose out of control, because those girls weren't just servants of gods. They were property of men, and once they entered the temple, the outside world forgot they ever existed. Every year, the priests selected girls to serve the gods. Some were taken from noble families, others from humble ones, but all were told the same story, that being chosen was the greatest honor of their lives. Parents smiled through tears as they handed their daughters over, thinking they were sending them to paradise. They didn't know they were saying goodbye forever. Inside, the girls lived under strict vows: silence, obedience, purity. They were forbidden to speak unless commanded, forbidden to touch anyone, forbidden to dream of freedom. They studied hymns, learned sacred symbols, and followed endless rituals. The priests told them that their bodies were temples of the gods, yet treated them like property. Imagine being only a teenager and hearing that every breath you take belongs to a god who never answers you back. Scary thought, right? But for these girls, it wasn't just scary, it was destiny. Once you crossed the temple gates, you didn't belong to your family anymore. You belonged to the gods and to the men who claimed to speak for them. And behind those towering walls, something dark was waiting. From the outside, Egyptian temples were magnificent. Marble courtyards, tall obelisks, and gold that shimmered under the sun. But step deeper, and the light began to fade. The air grew heavy with incense. Shadows stretched long across the walls. This was the inner temple, the sanctum sanctorum, where only priests and the chosen virgins could enter. No sound escaped. No truth left those halls. The temple virgins slept in narrow stone chambers, surrounded by darkness. They rose before dawn, prayed for hours, and performed rituals they barely understood. If one disobeyed, the gods, they were told, would punish her with eternal suffering. Some girls whispered about screams echoing through the corridors at night. Others vanished completely. The priests claimed they were taken by the gods, but deep down, everyone knew what that really meant. Why did the holiest place in Egypt feel like a tomb? Because holiness was the perfect cover for horror, and soon those horrors took a new name: purification. Before we go deeper, let's pause for a second, because if you think kings were powerful in Egypt, you're wrong. The priests were untouchable. They owned land, gold, and knowledge. They read the stars, interpreted dreams, and wrote the sacred texts. They didn't just serve the gods. They became the gods in the eyes of the people. When a priest said, "The gods demand this," no one questioned it. Not even the pharaoh. And that's what made them unstoppable. They used divine fear like a leash, one that kept both rulers and commoners bound. And when they claimed that a ritual must be performed for purity, it wasn't a request. It was an order from heaven itself. You think modern politicians are scary? Try arguing with someone who says, "Disagree with me," and you're defying Ra. That was Egypt's reality. Faith had become a weapon, and the temple virgins were its first victims. Now we reach the darkest part of the story. The purification rituals. Every month, when the moon rose over the Nile, the priests prepared their most sacred ceremony. The temples filled with music, chanting, and the thick smell of burning myrrh. But the real ritual took place deep inside, far from any mortal eyes. There, under the glow of oil lamps, the temple virgins were told they must offer themselves completely to the gods. Their purity, the priest said, must be tested. Their devotion proven through sacrifice. The girls believed this was holy. They believed that pain brought them closer to divinity. But in truth, it only brought them closer to ruin. Every cry was called a prayer, every wound a blessing. And every time the ritual ended, the priests walked away calling it sacred work. No one outside ever knew what those ceremonies truly were. The temples recorded them as acts of divine unity. But the silence of the victims said everything. Some girls never survived the ritual. Those who did were changed forever. Quiet, lifeless, like the statues they served. Faith can build civilizations. But in the wrong hands, it becomes the perfect disguise for cruelty. And in Egypt's temples, cruelty wore the face of a god. For centuries, Egypt's temples stood untouched. The priests passed down their secrets through generations, and no one dared to question them. The people outside still saw beauty, not realizing that the true price of faith was being paid in silence. Servants who spoke too much disappeared. Families who questioned the rituals were punished with divine curses. The temple virgins performed their roles perfectly, smiling during festivals, singing hymns to crowds who worshipped them. But behind those smiles was emptiness. It's strange, isn't it? The same civilization that built wonders to celebrate life also mastered the art of hiding death behind beauty. Ever seen a god statue smile? Maybe it smiled because it knew the truth. But time has its own justice. When the sands finally began to shift, Egypt's silence started to break, and history began to whisper what the priests tried to bury. Thousands of years later, archaeologists dug into Egypt's ruins, and what they found changed everything. Hidden chambers, wall carvings showing rituals far darker than any festival, symbols of purification that didn't match ordinary worship. Greek historians like Herodotus had written about unspeakable temple rites. For centuries, people dismissed those words as myths. But now archaeology began to agree. Scholars found inscriptions describing offerings of flesh, purity through pain, and chosen vessels of the divine. These weren't poetic metaphors. They were records of control, fear, and manipulation. It became clear that some of Egypt's priests had used faith to justify domination, and the temple virgins weren't holy servants. They were victims of divine tyranny. Even today, Egypt's sands hide more secrets than they reveal. But one thing is certain, the line between devotion and destruction has always been razor thin. And so, the temples fell silent. The gold faded. The gods were forgotten. But the cries of those temple virgins, they still echo through time. Every stone in those ruins, every cracked wall in Luxor and Karnak, carries whispers of the lives that were sacrificed in the name of purity. We call them legends, but for those who lived them, they were nightmares carved in stone. History has a cruel habit. It hides its darkest truths behind beauty. We look at the pyramids and marvel at their perfection, but beneath that perfection, there was pain. The kind of pain that even gods couldn't justify. And yet, humanity never learns, does it? Every age has its temples. Every generation has its priests. People in power still use faith, fear, and illusion to control the innocent. Maybe that's why stories like these still matter. Because they remind us what happens when power is worshipped more than truth. Let me ask you something. If the priests of Egypt could make an entire civilization believe their lies, what makes us so sure we aren't living inside new temples today? Built not of stone, but of screens, systems, and stories. That's the real curse. Not on tombs, but on minds. And here's the wildest part. The same human mind that was once enslaved by fear also holds the power to create miracles. It can build civilizations, decode the stars, even turn nothing into everything. It's the power of compounding, not just in money, but in knowledge, curiosity, and action. Every small thing you learn, every truth you uncover, multiplies over time, shaping who you become. That's exactly what my next video explores. How the power of compounding changed human destiny. Because where fear destroyed empires, knowledge built them. If you think ancient priests were powerful, wait until you understand how a single idea, compounded over years, can move the entire world. So don't just close this tab, go deeper down the rabbit hole of truth and transformation. Click on the end screen right now And let me show you how the same force that built the pyramids can build your future. Because history's darkest pages are not just about what happened. They're warnings for what can happen again if we forget. I'm glad you stayed till the end, because that means you're not afraid of truth. And if you're still here, you're already part of dark pages of history. A place where stories are not just told, they're felt. So, before you go, hit that like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss what lies hidden beneath the next layer of history. Now, step into the light and watch the next video. The power of compounding. How small things create big empires. Because the real magic of history is realizing how it never stops repeating.